The Louisville Cardinal football team concludes their regular season this Saturday as they host the Kentucky Wildcats in the annual Governor's Cup. That matchup, 7:30 kickoff at Cardinal Stadium. We're going to begin to dive into the preview of that matchup, along with discussing the 73-67 win over Detroit Mercy for the Louisville basketball team on Saturday. All that and more on this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode is brought to you by Sonos, which is the proud sponsor of ESPN College Football. You can find out more at Sonos.com. A lot on the docket for this Monday edition of the show. We're going to begin to dive into the preview of Louisville, Kentucky, which will happen this Saturday. I'm going to first analyze and explain why it's hard to gauge how good this Kentucky team actually is. And then we'll transition over into the basketball side of things. A rather unconvincing 73-67 win over Detroit Mercy on Saturday for the Cardinal basketball team. We're going to look into what areas of improvement need to be made as they head into a difficult Thanksgiving week schedule. And then finally, as always, we will end this episode with a weekly mailbag segment. But before we get into the content of today's show, like I mentioned, for those who are not aware of who I am, my name is Dalton Pence. I am a credentialed media member for Cardinal Sports Zone, where I serve as both a football beat writer and a recruiting analyst. I also do some P announcing work for the university in various sports. You can follow my Twitter at the handle in the graphic below. And you can follow the podcast Twitter page at LO_Louisville. So let's get right on into it. The Kentucky Wildcats entering this matchup 8-3 on the season. Started out 6-0, had the makings of a team that could potentially sneak into the SEC championship game. But unfortunately, they have the Georgia Bulldogs on that schedule. And then they ended up losing to Mississippi State and Tennessee after that. But winners of their last two against Vanderbilt and New Mexico State. It's very challenging to analyze how good this team is. Number one, because they don't necessarily have any statistical averages that jump off the page. But more importantly, the strength of schedule is where I draw some of my concerns. Now, I got to be honest, this whole season, I've had a very bad taste of 2019 in my mouth to where, yes, Louisville may have beaten teams that are overall better than Kentucky, but I think it's the fact that the Wildcats have matched up very well with the weaknesses that Louisville's had, in the trenches. And that's why I've been kind of, I wouldn't necessarily say, definitely hesitant, and more so cautious to be overly optimistic about this game. I think that the Cardinals can win. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that this is a for sure loss by any stretch of the imagination. But it came out yesterday that the Cardinals are a 2-point favorite in this game, which is very, very interesting if I do say so. But let's jump right into the numbers of things. The Wildcats not necessarily doing anything statistically outlandish. 46th in the country, 31.6 points per game. You'll get the other side of the ball. They're 38th in the country, allowing 22 points per game. Comparing them to what Louisville is doing, they are scoring less than the Cards and doing a little bit better on the defensive end. The Cards are outgaining the Cats per game this season, and in turn, the Cats haven't necessarily given up as many yards as the Cardinal defense. I think one thing that the Kentucky defense really makes its bread and butter is just the rushing defense, only allowing 115.5 yards per contest to the opponents. When you talk to Kentucky fans, you kind of see the go back and forth on Twitter. It's very evident that Kentucky's fan base and some of their media are not necessarily comfortable with the passing defense. The passing defense hasn't necessarily, stepped up to bat and done well in recent weeks. But I got to be honest, I think that it makes this such a hard team to really gauge. And I think Wake Forest was the other team this season to where I had this issue, is because, they're not necessarily doing anything that's going to make you go, really? Wow. But I mean, they're respectable in a lot of categories. But it's the strength of schedule. It's the lack of playing very good opponents that really kind of does in for Kentucky for me. And I get it. They're an SEC team. The SEC is the best football conference yet again. That is not a surprise to anyone that watches this sport. But they're not necessarily playing those top SEC teams. I mean, it looked like the best win on their schedule was supposed to be Florida, and Florida looks like they could be firing Dan Mullen. I think they actually may have. I knew he sent out a tweet saying that he was going to step down or something like that. He sent out a tweet saying, "Thank you for letting me be the head coach of Florida," so on and so forth. But the wins this season for Kentucky overall, for starters, 67th in terms of strength of schedule out of 130. So right in the midway point, they have wins over Louisiana Monroe, New Mexico State, Chattanooga, and those are the non-Power 5 teams. But when you look at what they've done in the SEC, they beat Missouri by 7, beat South Carolina by 6. They beat a Florida team by 7. Their biggest win comes against LSU. It was a 21-point victory on October 9th. And then they beat Vanderbilt by 17. But the 3 losses on the year: 17-point loss to Georgia, 14-point loss to Mississippi State, 3-point loss to Tennessee. And that's where, I watched this game against Georgia, and overall, I mean, I was impressed with what I saw from the front 7. And I was actually impressed, with the Kentucky offense for the first time in quite some time. Wan'Dale Robinson is as good of a slot receiver as there are any in the country. That rushing attack behind that very good offensive line that has multiple draft picks in Darian Kennard, Dari Rosenthal, et cetera, Chris Rodriguez, Cavassier Smoke. That is one of the best running back tandems in the country. Will Levis has proven to be serviceable in that role. It's difficult. I keep coming back to this whole, it's difficult to gauge because, yes, you see that they have the talent. I mean, the talent's there. They've got NFL talent on the offense. They've got NFL talent in the trenches. Jae'Lyn Jones, DeAndre Square in the linebacking core, Yusuf Corker in the secondary. I mean, they have playmakers all over that defense, and it seems like the Kentucky defense has struggled in weeks past before the Vanderbilt game. So that 3-game stretch between Georgia, Mississippi State, and Tennessee is the really one to focus on because Georgia is not necessarily known for being that good of an offensive team, although they have a lot of firepower. But Mississippi State really had their way with the Cats in the second half, and Tennessee dropped 45. So I think that I'm feeling more and more confident that this isn't going to be a blowout win for Kentucky. But when you look at the schedule, their wins aren't necessarily all that convincing. I mean, South Carolina, Missouri, I mean, these are one-score games, teams that are fighting for bowl eligibility. LSU is obviously having a very down season. They're fighting for bowl eligibility. They have to win their game against Texas A&M to be bowl eligible. And then the Florida Gators, who were number 10 when they came into Lexington, they are now 5-6, and the program is at a little bit of a crossroads. So there isn't necessarily a good win per se on the schedule for Kentucky. An 8-3 record. One thing that they do is they've handled business, and that's one thing to focus on is the fact that they don't necessarily get beat by inferior competition often. They handle business, but it's more so when they play teams that are more evenly matched that it's hard to pull wins out. And I mean, and it's not really their fault. I mean, they had Florida and LSU on their schedule this season. Both teams are usually top 15 teams. So we could be singing a different song if both of those teams live up to expectations, but it derives us of, that possibility, and it makes the waters more muddy in terms of gauging how good this team is. Bottom line is they have the talent to play with almost anyone in the country, but at times I think they get in their own way. They turn the ball over a lot. They don't force a lot of turnovers. That is something that hinders them. The passing defense has been an issue as of late, and it's just interesting to see which Kentucky offense will come to play. But we will definitely continue to preview this matchup, and we have some special guests set for the rest of the week to talk about this matchup as we move forward. Before we get into the basketball portion of things, which, the Cardinals 73-67 win over Detroit Mercy, who was 0-3 coming into the matchup. If you were looking to, get any relief in terms of the basketball team being able to turn things around. Not necessarily something that you're going to be able to look for in that matchup. It was not good in a lot of ways, but we will talk all about that after we talk about our friends down at PrizePicks. If you are a college football fanatic or college sports fanatic in general, you need to hear about PrizePicks. I love it, and I know you will too. It's a leader in college sports daily fantasy, offering more college football props than anyone in the world, while offering all of the star players of the Power 5 as well as mid-major players you might not have ever heard of. PrizePicks offers any prop you can think of, from yardage to touchdowns, even interceptions thrown. All of those that deposit and use the promo code LOCKEDON will receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. So here's how it works. You pick about 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's literally just you versus the projected numbers, and it allows mixed sports entries. So you can take the over on Russell Wilson and combine that with the under on Damian Lillard in the same entry. Use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. It's safe and offers fast withdrawal. So do yourself a favor. Check out prizepicks.com and use the promo code LOCKEDON, or go to your app store and download the app today. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. So, as I mentioned, the Cardinals struggled to a 73-67 win over Detroit Mercy on Saturday. It was a tie ball game with around a minute to go. Thankfully, Noah Locke hit a off-balance fadeaway three-pointer to break the scoreless tie, and a couple of crucial defensive possessions led by Jared West ultimately put the Cards at the free throw line to ice this game. But like I mentioned, if you were looking for any relief from the first 3 games in terms of some issues that you were seeing, it didn't come in this game, and that is a little bit definitely a little bit discouraging when you look forward to the teams that they have to play this week, on Thanksgiving against Mississippi State. And if they win that game, then they'll play Maryland, and we'll have some talk about that as the week goes on. But overall, I think some of the same issues that we saw from this game were some that we saw in the first 3 games. And I want to talk about improvements that we should look for through the first 4 games, or in reaction to what we've seen in the first 4 games. Number one, in my opinion, I think that the Cards definitely have to cut down on the turnovers. At times, it seems like Louisville plays with their food in a certain metaphor, meaning that Louisville was up by 13 points. I believe it was 50-37. The nation's leading scorer, Antoine Davis, caught fire, so to speak, and Detroit Mercy was able to make a big-time comeback. But ultimately, I think turnovers played a big key in that. 15 turnovers for the Cards in this one. It seems like that really causes some overall cohesiveness issues. Sorry, getting a little tongue twisted there. But it doesn't allow your team to be able to put teams away. I mean, they only beat Navy by 17. They beat Southern by 12. And I felt like both of these teams, in a couple weeks, Louisville might be beating both those teams by 30. And that's why I don't want to be overly too critical, because it has only been 4 games. And you can't necessarily say this team is not going to make the tournament after the 4th game of the season, especially for a team that has not even played with their head coach yet. Chris Mack still suspended through the trip to the Bahamas on Thanksgiving week. He will be back early December. So there is no Chris Mack. Mike Pegues is being forced to go with things on the fly. Work through some rotations, and the rotational issues have been prevalent as well. We've seen that, bringing in a lot of newcomers, it was bound to, have some chemistry issues early on this season, which is to be expected. But it seems like there's been more issues than normal to, pick and plug guys and try to just overall find rotations that work. I think that, there's a question in the next segment about the starting lineup, and to be completely transparent, I'm not necessarily sure what those rotations would look like. I have a couple in mind that I would like to see happen, but at the end of the day, I mean that's going to be a big key to watch for in this matchup against Mississippi State, because they are a respectable opponent, and it'll be the first team that has probably comparable talent to the Cards. So overall, we mentioned, the rotational aspect of things. Turnovers, another key aspect is the rebounding portion. Louisville did win this, the rebounding battle 37-33 against Detroit Mercy, but Detroit Mercy had more offensive rebounds. They struggled to rebound the ball against Southern, against Furman, against Navy, against Detroit Mercy, and that is, somewhat concerning considering that the Cardinals have had a distinct size advantage over all of their opponents at most positions. And, that has to be something that changes as you go into this next part of the season because you're playing bigger guys. I mean, you have you have teams like Michigan State coming up, Kentucky. Mississippi State has Garrison Brooks, who, for those who remember, played in North Carolina, is a rebounding machine. They're going to have their hands full, and it's going to be a team effort. Mike Pegues made a comment in the postgame presser after the game against Detroit Mercy, which I was not necessarily, you don't applaud it, but I respected it. It was accountability. He said, he's like, we expect a lot out of Jae'Lyn Withers, and, I'm just paraphrasing here, he needs to, give his full effort on the defensive end and in the rebounding. And I think that, it's good to have that accountability. And, you would think that this is going to motivate Withers to hopefully, getting, his act together on the defensive glass because, it's evident, the Cards don't have a true rim protector. So what they have to do is they have to crash the boards, even harder. And, having a guy like Jae'Lyn Withers, who's one of the bigger guys on the court, not necessarily going as hard on the, both ends of the glass, it's showing. I mean, it's an effort thing. And I think that the effort has not necessarily been in an issue on the defensive end of things. Jared West has been very solid. And, there's been a lot of other guys, Dre Davis, Malik Williams. I think that, the effort is there. I just think it's the composure and it's the execution on that side of the ball. You just because you make a guy miss and it comes off the rim doesn't mean that the play's over. Obviously analysis, but you have to complete the defensive stop. I mean, you have to go get the ball. I like what I've been seeing from Jared West in terms of attacking the glass. Matt Cross as well. Also Sam Williamson, Dre Davis. I mean, there has been some good attention from the guards, but it's an overall team effort. So you have to be able to focus on the rebounding aspect of things. Another thing that really calls for an issue, and I might be nitpicking here, but I feel like there's a lot of stretches in these last four games in which the Cardinal offense has just gone absolutely cold. And I think that that's an indication of not having a true go-to scorer. I know that Noah Locke is being used as that guy, but I mean, there's times where his shots aren't falling. And I'm not necessarily implying that we need to see more from Noah Locke because I think he's doing really well. I think his shot's going to continue to fall, but he needs someone to step up and fulfill that secondary scoring role. I like what I've been seeing from El Ellis. You thought that was going to be Jae'Lyn Withers to start the season, but he hasn't necessarily jumped off the page by any means, so to speak. I'm continually looking for more. I see Withers, hitting some tough shots, hitting some, three balls, but I'm glad to see Dre Davis have a big game against Detroit Mercy, but I find myself continually just wanting just a little bit more from the Cards on the offensive end. We know that they've got the shooters. It's just a matter of having guys that can go out and get the buckets. And, like I said, maybe I'm nitpicking, but I haven't necessarily been, put it this way, there hasn't been a convincing win yet against, four mid-major teams that aren't necessarily all that great. I mean, I know that Furman could get to the NCAA tournament and be a potential Cinderella story team, but the other three teams, not necessarily quality opponents, and that's kind of concerning. But we'll talk about the Cardinals game against Mississippi State as this week goes on. I want to talk about get into the weekly Monday Mailbag segment where there are both football and basketball questions. Before we do that, I want to talk about our friends at BetOnline. We're back and we're better than ever. A new web interface to start the basketball season, along with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action. Head over to the new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit by using the promo code LOCKEDON. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for this year. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports, and BetOnline is where the game starts. So, we are into the final segment of the show. The weekly Monday Mailbag segment is officially underway. We're going to continue a little bit of the conversation we just had about the Louisville basketball team. And the first question is, what is your ideal starting lineup for the Louisville basketball team? This is a tough question because, like I mentioned, I don't know the answer. There are guys that have played better in certain games, and then other guys play better in other games. But I think if you made me pick from what I've seen the first 4 games, I think that I would probably go. Probably, I don't know, man. I would give L. Ellis the nod to start here, or Mason Faulkner at the 1. No Lock at the 2. For right now, Dre Davis, because of what we saw against Detroit Mercy, but Matt Cross is right there as well. You can probably go 1A, 1B, and then Withers and Malik Williams. But overall, this is where you have to kind of tinker with lineups. I'm not saying that Jared West is playing bad. Don't take it that this way that I'm bashing him. I think that L. Ellis brings a different dynamic to this team. He's more of a guy that can get downhill and get into the teeth of the defense, so to speak. And I think that that's such a valuable skill. I think that he's going to get better as the season progresses. And I think Faulkner has a bit of a higher offensive ceiling than Jared West does. You cannot replicate what West does on the defensive end, although that Faulkner and Ellis are 2 serviceable options there. I think due to the offensive woes, I would probably go L. Ellis or Faulkner in some of these situations just to get some more offense and keep the ball flowing. Dre Davis, Matt Cross. We talked last week about how Matt Cross should be starting. I still think he should. But the thing about it is Dre Davis had a very solid game against Detroit Mercy, flirted with the double-double, was probably the most impressive card of the afternoon. So for right now, he gets a pass. And I have to, ponder a different lineup. I want to see, I'm not saying this lineup should start, but this is definitely a situational appeal. I'd like to see a lineup that would go, L. Ellis, Noah Locke, Dre Davis, Sam Williamson, and Jae'Lyn Withers. I know that Withers is viewed as the 4, but the lack of lateral quickness makes me to believe that his best days in the future are potentially at the 5. I know he's not necessarily a rim protector, but neither is Malik Williams. I think that Withers, shined as the 5 last season. And, a little bit of a rough transition playing alongside Malik as the 4. And then you have a guy like Sam Williamson who plays bigger than he is at that 6'8" frame. And you're able to, spread defenses out. Switch Davis out for Matt Cross, because I think when Matt Cross and Sam Williamson play together, it's just this weird mesh. It's just a beautiful sight on the basketball court, how they're able to play against each other. But overall, I think that this starting lineup is serviceable. But at the end of the day, if you wanted to tinker with it, I think you could make the change at the point guard position or the small forward position, or you could go a little smaller into the front court. But switching over to the football side of things, which player or players worries you most about this Kentucky team? There are 2 of them. Number 1, Chris Rodriguez. Rodriguez is honestly, in my opinion, the best running back that will play this year. I know that Sean Tucker and Mateo Durant, the 2 last opponents for the Cardinals, are maybe ahead of him statistically, but I think that that's more an indication that there's more mouths to feed in that Kentucky offense. Cavassier Smoke is a very good secondary option, and then the Kentucky offense has really opened it up this season. And you have the other guy in Wan'Dale Robinson, who, in fact, frightens me. I could see this guy having an absolute field day, and that's not I'm not bashing the Louisville secondary, although the passing defense has been a struggle for the Cards this whole season. Without Kittrell Clark, having a guy that can line up in the slot, out wide, getting him out in space in wide receiver screens, giving him jet sweeps, handoffs. There's so many different ways that Liam Cohen has been using Wan'Dale Robinson that leads me to believe that he is going to be one player that Brian Brown looks up at the whiteboard and circles his name in bright red dry erase marker. You have to focus on this game. You have to know where he is at all times, because he is a player that, if you aren't careful, it's a house call. He can score from anywhere on the field very quick. Not the biggest guy. I think he's about like 5'9" or something like that. But every time he touches, he's like a Tutu Atwell. You have to be able to game plan around him. But outside of that, I don't think that there's anybody that jumps off the page defensively. And then offensively, Will Levis is a solid quarterback, but Chris Rodriguez, Wan'Dale Robinson are the players that scare me for this for this Kentucky offense. But the final question of the day is, does the 2019 outcome hold on, what's that say? Does the 2019 outcome affect the way you view this contest? Yeah, very much so. And because that's the last game they played. I know it's 2 years removed. They had an offense that was, specifically designed, or it wasn't specifically designed, but it was perfectly designed to really hurt the Louisville defense. They had a running quarterback, a wide receiver converted to quarterback that ran behind a great offensive line in an absolute monsoon, 56-10. It was 13-10 at halftime, and then Kentucky just broke it open. I think that Louisville has done a good job at addressing the depth at the offensive and defensive lines. They've gotten better in both regards. The defense has gotten better. The offense is better. I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any stretch of the imagination. But you also, it's that game is the last time I saw these two teams play, and the Kentucky in the trenches is still very solid. They have a solid offense. They have a good defense, and it's going to be a dogfight. Louisville does have Uncle Mo on their side. The momentum is definitely in favor of the Cardinals. So we'll continue to talk about this matchup, but overall, we discussed why it's hard to gauge how good Kentucky is. Talked about areas of improvement needed to be seen for the Louisville basketball team as they approach a very challenging Thanksgiving week down in the Bahamas. And then we conducted the weekly Monday Mailbag. Well, as I alluded to, there's going to be some special guests that haven't been on the show this week. Jeremy Wallman will be back on. Before we get out of here, I want to give a couple quick shout-outs. First to the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast. That episode dropped on Saturday, talking about the Detroit Mercy game and this Kentucky matchup. You can find that at cardinalsportszone.com. Also want to give a shout-out to the Locked On Bets podcast, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis from Lee Sterling. You can find that on the Odyssey app or wherever you like to get your podcasts. But as a whole, that's going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. Everyone have a great start to your week. Talk crap to some Kentucky friends, Kentucky family that you may have that cheer for the team down in Lexington. Go Cards, but have a good rest of your day.